which teams could go undefeated through the 2020 season? This is an interesting topic to discuss right now because of all of these crazy upsets, okay? So which teams could we see go undefeated this season? Well, I'm going to pull up a graphic here. Which teams are undefeated right now in the top 10 and which teams we could see go undefeated, as well as who I think is going to end up undefeated at the end of the year. Which teams are going to be undefeated? So these are the teams right now that are undefeated. You got Penn State at the top, Iowa, Nebraska, Virginia Tech, Wisconsin, Lehigh, NC State, and Arizona State. So there are 8 teams that could go undefeated, that are undefeated right now, all in the top 10. Right outside of there is actually Iowa State. Now, Iowa State has a tough duel coming up, but now I'm going to discuss the wins these teams have in the season so far, as well as their upcoming duels that they have going on. First up is Penn State. Now, Penn State has already a win against Navy, 1-0. Upcoming, they're going to be facing off against Arizona State on November 22nd, as well as Lehigh, and then probably their biggest duel of the year, which is going to be a massive game changer, is the Iowa duel on January 31st, and that's really going to prove whether they are that top-tier contending team. Now, of course, Iowa, another team that could go undefeated. They already have a win against Chattanooga. Their next test probably isn't going to be until Nebraska. Nebraska, that number 3 ranked team in the country right now in the rankings. But then, like I said, Penn State, they're going to have Wisconsin and Ohio State. And you see, of course, a lot of these teams are in Big Ten, and not all of them can go undefeated. So, at number 3, Nebraska, their next big duel they're going to have to win is going to be up against Wisconsin. Wisconsin, of course, is right there in the rankings. Then they have Iowa, Penn State, and Ohio State in February. Are they going to be able to pull that off? What do you think? Before we go any further, please let me know which teams you think are going to go undefeated by the end of the year. And one of the biggest storylines, of course, on the season so far has been Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech ranked number 4 in the country, tied with Wisconsin as 3-0 with 3 wins over ranked opponents. Missouri, Northwestern, and Ohio State have proven to be a real threat. And they are a team who I think has a very, very strong shot at going undefeated throughout this entire season. Their next biggest duel, their biggest opponent is probably going to be up against North Carolina in January, then NC State. And I'll get to NC State in just a minute. And then they also will be facing up against Pitt, because all of those teams are some tough ACC opponents. And the ACC is just, it's an exciting conference this year, to say the least. And number 4 tied also is Wisconsin. Wisconsin 5-0 already, have the most wins out of all of these teams. Now, didn't necessarily go up against all of that many ranked teams, but they did beat Fresno, Army, and Navy, just to name a couple of schools. Their biggest duel of the season coming up January 1st against Iowa. We'll see what kind of team Wisconsin is then. And then they're going to have to go up against a couple of these other teams: Nebraska, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan. They'll be facing all of them this season. Then Lehigh. Lehigh has already knocked off Oklahoma State, the number 4 ranked team in the country. Now they will be facing Pitt, Penn State, and Arizona State. If they could knock off Penn State as they're the number 1 team in the country, I will be very, very impressed. But they've already knocked off Oklahoma State in what was a very close duel. It came down to the wire. Now, at number 9 in the country right now is NC State. NC State is 4-0 with win over Old Dominion, a couple of I don't know if they're D2, D3 schools, but that's NC State. And they will be wrestling Cornell, Princeton, Virginia, as well as Pitt, UNC, and Virginia Tech. And then Arizona State, who's 4-0, has already knocked off Purdue and Virginia. They will be wrestling Penn State this upcoming weekend, as well as Ohio State, Iowa State, Stanford, Missouri, as well as Lehigh. So which team has the best chance of going out undefeated on the season out of all of these schools? Now, I think one of the things that's probably the most interesting to discuss here is, what are the odds that any of these teams can go undefeated? Because listen, they can't all go undefeated. That's just a fact. That is just a fact that they cannot all go undefeated because they're all wrestling each other at some point. There are 2 teams, I believe, two or three are the max number of teams that can go undefeated. But here are a couple of the storylines here. If Arizona State can defeat Penn State, I think that they have a shot at going undefeated because they have some tough competition, but not as tough as some of these other opponents where I think that if they can beat Penn State, then they're a real threat. Now, next up is Penn State or Iowa. It's going to be either Penn State that goes undefeated or Iowa. I mean, you can also see Ohio State already lost, so they can't actually. Penn State or Iowa. This will be decided on January 31st. I think both of these teams have a shot at being undefeated by the time they face off, which just makes it more exciting. You see it maybe an outside shot at Nebraska, Lehigh, or Wisconsin. If one of those teams knocks Iowa or Penn State off early on, well, then you don't have that storyline. But I think that that's going to be the storyline in January, and then a very similar storyline is going to be Virginia Tech, versus NC State. NC State could be 13-0, and Virginia Tech could be 12-0 by the time that if they both win out to that point, they could be both undefeated going into their February 14th duel, which could lead up into being one of the last best duels of the entire season, and I'm excited to see. So what are the FanKo odds that these teams go undefeated? Well, I'm kind of putting these on odds as far as which their schedule, who they go up against, all that. So NC State, I think right now has the best chance of going undefeated, mostly just because they don't face off against as many tough opponents as these other teams. So if they end up beating Virginia Tech, if they go undefeated up until that point, beat Virginia Tech, they knock off Pitt, UNC, and then beat VT, they're going to go out undefeated on the season, and I think that's why they have the best chance over, let's say, a Penn State, who has a couple of tough opponents in their way. They're going to have a tough duel against Ohio State. They're going to have a tough duel against Ohio, as well as Lehigh, as well as, that's just how their schedule is. But they've pulled it off in the past. That's why I have them slightly above Iowa. Very similar to Virginia Tech. I'm hoping Virginia Tech is not just an early season momentum. I hope they keep that momentum building, keep it going, and we could see them going. But that's why I had them just a little bit below some of these other schools. And then we go kind of down a little bit, mostly just because these teams face tough teams early on. If they lose that, they can't go undefeated, obviously. So you have Lehigh at 30%, Arizona State at 20%, Wisconsin and Nebraska, just because these schools, they have so many chances of losing to a couple of these other teams. Of course, they have chances of winning too, but that's as far as the FanKo odds. So please tell me, am I crazy? And what do you think as far as these odds go?